Hello, and welcome to Two Wizards and a Mic. It's actually still, we're in the world of Zoomland or whatever this is and stuff. So, hi, how are you doing? Worst intro ever.
No, I've seen worse. I've seen worse.
All right, here we go.
There's a cartoon on Prime right now, actually.
Wait a minute. Hello, and welcome to Two Wizards and a Mic, where we are going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons because we love it and we play it. And I am Shane, and to my whatever side you're on.
I am Andrew.
And Andrew, do you do online? There's this company you started that has some sort of publishing thing going on. What is that?
Well, yes, I have Kwood Publishing, which makes products for Dungeons and Dragons, and I'm also a DM online for a couple of groups. And yeah, we've got a series of books we've been doing, which a few people would know in fifth edition called the Monsters series. So yeah, I think before we start here, we'll just do a little update of what we've been doing recently. But Shane, what world are you from?
Well, I play a lot in the world of Mirror myself, but I delve into the dungeons and I climb to the highest peaks and I fight whatever you throw at me. And usually, for some reason, either play tieflings or halflings. That seems to be my thing now. I'm trying to branch out, but really, those are sort of the hallmarks of my existence in D&D. Um, I started playing a long time ago. It was still the 70s, and I really delved into the 80s when I was able to actually take my allowance to the local store and buy the odd module. Um, and you started playing kind of the same way. Like, we were young, and then we went away for a while, and then we became adults, and we're like, you know what I'm missing in my life? I'm missing D&D again. So is that basically what you did?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I not long after I came to Canada from South Africa, D&D really started to creep into the conversation with games. Kind of I think it was around 79 when I started, but I can't remember exactly. It's a long time. And some kids from school just said, "Hey, do you want to come and play this game?" I didn't know anything about it, and we had an absolute blast. I couldn't believe how fun it was. Back then, we'd play kind of all weekend, like the Stranger Things kids. That's pretty accurate. And we'd break it up with going outside and playing football. And then one of the kids' moms had snacks for us, and but we'd play all day. And it was right at the beginning of around the beginning of basic D&D, really. And then not too long after that, I decided, I really want to DM. I want to be the leader of these stories. And I haven't actually had that many characters. Maybe less than maybe less than a dozen characters I've ever played as a player. Um, but I've spent almost my entire time DMing, just with our group, our West of the Wood group. I DM probably 90% of the time. I did just get this weekend a chance to be a player in a Traveler game.
Nice.
So another RPG from the 70s.
Now, oh my god, is that even does that actually use like a completely different system? Like it's not
Yeah,
even related to what we're used to?
it is a different, yeah, it's a different system with just 2d6 or sometimes 3d6, I guess, or but you can play with two. Yeah, you can play with 2d6. There's no other dice. But it's quite, all the RPGs, there's not really that big of a difference. Sometimes the mechanics are, can be more crunchy, less crunchy. Like for D&D, fifth edition is definitely the smoothest, most efficient system of all those um, systems. But it's basically, you tell the game master, dungeon master what you're doing, and then you roll a dice to see see if it works. So ultimately, they're not that different. And if you're someone who's watching from the outside, like my wife just says, you guys just look like a bunch of people sitting around a table laughing all night.
It's funny
um,
you say that sitting around a table. Like, we have not, I think, been in the same room playing the game. God, it's been actually it because we had like a winter break. We played up
mhm.
until like the end of December in 19 what is not 19 in 2019. And then I did we play at the beginning? I can't remember if we'd actually played at the beginning of 2020.
That's a good question. I
We
think
could
we
check the
did.
podcast. Maybe we
Yeah,
did. I just don't
yeah, I
recall.
think we played at the beginning of 2020, and then for sure February was when I shut everything down because you could see what was happening. And then about 2 or 3 weeks later here it hit, and then we locked down. Well, as hard to lock down as we've had, which hasn't been as
It's
bad
not
as
been that
somewhere.
drastic. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, we've been online, our group, west of the wood for 2 years.
It's
Yeah.
really sad because I know that I mean we've been playing online off and on to get on Zoom and stuff, but it's definitely not the same. I
No.
have to say that the first few times were okay, and then it was probably about the fifth or sixth time it started to sink in because I mean not just playing the game online but just the fact that COVID was going on so long.
Yeah.
But it does actually remind people that playing in person and we're actually able to like see the people across the table is way better than not.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
It's not ideal to be playing online, but I think we found with our group that we've actually had more fun than we thought.
yeah, it's true.
And you definitely get used to it. And we've all got used to using Zoom and other platforms. Because even that at the beginning was, you're not used to being, well, most people aren't used to it. But we found ways to do it. There's still things, like you say, that you miss. Like I use music a lot when I DM, and
Yeah,
I haven't really figured out the best way to do that online. Um, and it's just reading the table is different. Like I go to a lot of trouble to make sure that I have everyone's attention, just like when I was a teacher. And it's a bit more challenging online. Again, the one easy way that you can get people back in the groove is you just make sure that they know their player that is in danger, or something's happening to their PC. As soon as that happens, usually people start paying more attention. Um, so there's usually
we're
ways that you can get people back on track. Um,
a tentacle bursts out of the wall and grips you around the neck. What? I thought we were just at the pub. Yeah, well,
yeah,
we were,
you
and we
are.
still
Yeah,
are, but
yeah,
now.
yeah. This is from another dimension. No, it's the old, rocks fall, everybody dies. If you are fully in control of the world, you should be able to get everybody's attention.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
So there's ways to do it, but it's not the same because somebody can be looking at their phone. And if they were doing that at the table, I would say something or I would give them the teacher stare. Um, but online, you got to let things go a bit more because people are obviously in their own space at home, and it's a different animal. Um, so I can't wait till we're in person again, and then you can see what's changed with our setup here because I also added to the tabletop over the last 2 years. So
Oh yeah, you suddenly out of it felt like it was out of nowhere. You had all these 3D objects that
yeah,
kind of started getting peppered into it, and then I think it was the last time, or actually maybe earlier in December, uh, where suddenly there were trees. I remember that because I was like, "What? Look!" You had just had this desire to want to like reach out and like touch all of the stuff and just like, oh yeah,
yeah,
it was so cool. So I am looking forward to it. I mean, speaking of like table stuff like that to me is one of the things that has I had to go through after coming back to the game about what 3 4 years ago now, um, that I didn't have any of the books because I had not purchased any. I think I had some second edition with sort of the new stuff
Mhm.
sitting on the shelf, but then I did go out and get it, and then I was struggling a bit trying to figure out, I want to know how to make the coolest characters, and but I have to have all these books and stuff, and I had to collect all these books together, and then it wasn't until I think it was it Monsters of Feyland, or was it? I think it was Monsters of Feyland. Monsters of Feyland came out, and that really kind of made me go and yeah, Mom, you know that thing you ask me every year? I know that I'm in my late 40s, and could you get me some D&D books for Christmas? Like, it was basically how it happened. And then suddenly I had like a few more that I've been collecting. Um, but I'm thinking about books because I know that you have a new book coming out that I'm very excited about. And yeah, what's
Yeah.
the update in the publishing world for you?
So a quick update for Kwood Publishing. So the newest book is Monsters of the Wilderness, which is our fourth book in the Monsters series. And our generous Kickstarter backers helped us get that together. The PDF went out to the Kickstarter backers before Christmas. And the book itself, the printed book, that is going out. Hopefully, the shipping will be in mid-March, which means the public version, when we release it publicly, will hopefully be around that time, mid-March, beginning of April. And that is the largest book we've ever done. And it's got 7 wilderness regions. So if you want to if you want to have a campaign or adventure in the mountains or oceans or the desert, it's got all these different regions. It has a story from our world of Mir. So it's got a whole built-in narrative about this wizard and his family and the Wizard Council. And yeah, it's definitely my favorite of the books we've done so far. And the other update is that we're working on the 5th book now, and that should be coming to Kickstarter hopefully April or May. And that will be another large book like the last one, probably 120 monsters, around 160 pages. And we'll announce that fairly soon what the theme is, because we've been to Phaland so far, we've been to the underworld, we've been to the city, now we've done the wilderness, and we have something special coming up next.
Now the big thing for the next book. Now, what do we know about the next book? Is it completely under the wrap still?
The 5th book,
Yeah.
all I can say is it's going to be very large, like the wilderness book. So, as I said, probably 120 monsters, 160 pages, which is what the wilderness book is. And it's
Okay.
going to have very unique creatures. We'll have the same artist again, Travis Hansen. Um, it'll
Who
be
I
our
really
most.
like. I
Sorry.
love his style. I
Oh,
like his style.
oh, great. Yeah, we love. The first time I saw his work, I thought, man, this would be good for a monster book. And there's not a lot of D&D with a comic style. And I like the balance where it has edginess, but it's still fun and it's still um, yeah, it's still great fantasy art. It's a really interesting blend. There's really nobody who does art like that in RPGs that I know of. And it really suits the kind of nature of our books that's very unique, and a lot of the monsters you're never going to see anywhere else. And the new book, I can say that more than any other one, the 5th book that's coming. Um, yeah, and as I said, we'll announce that soon. The Wilderness book, I could tell you anything about because the Kickstarter backers already have the PDF.
Which I was going through last week, the week before. Like it was. I'm very excited about it. Like it's. I'm actually the thing. I speaking of people who back the thing. The one thing I did notice is that when I put the latest book, like the other book, I only got the paperback, and then when this Kickstarter came out, I'm like, you know what? I'm looking at my shelf, and I've got all these hardcovers, and then I have this one paperback. Like, I got to get the hardcover for that one. So I did that. Where hopefully the whatever that thing is for Kickstarters. But the thing I would like to mention to people is that if you want to know anything about what Kwood Publishing is doing, you can go to theworldofmirror.com. And everything. And by the way, and the reason I bring this up is that I don't know when you changed your website,
Hmm.
but I really like what you did because, um, because I was looking at it, and be like, okay, that's the new Kickstarter. Da, da, da. Oh, the books and the actual world, and then the actual adventures. Like that actually reminded me there were adventures too, that you had
Right.
created, and so I really like this. And of course, going to the West of the Woods podcast. So I just thought I'd put a plug in for that because I was very impressed.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, we have done a series of adventures for our World of Mirror, which were the adventures that our West of the Wood group did um, about 3 or 4 years ago now. Um, we actually published that whole campaign, so it takes you from level 1 all the way to level 20. And then a new group that I have, the Old Boys Club, which is only online because we're all over Western Canada. That group, their podcast is going to be on this channel, on the YouTube channel, or it is on the channel right now, and we've done about nine nine episodes already, and that one has video. Where our other group, West of the Wood, it's just audio at this point.
Yeah, that is actually a real challenge for. I mean, it's kind of amusing because I actually have had some people ask me about how would they put on a like an online game,
Hmm.
and they don't realize the amount of hardware they actually need. And one example that I gave to people was there's this there was a, it's a I think it's the what was it called, the Geeks and something, I've forgotten exactly what it was. It had some famous actors on it anyway, but that's not really
Okay.
the point. The point is that they had this set that they did all their, they played board games, they played D&D,
Hmm.
and it's like people don't notice the camera work.
Hmm.
But the number of cameras in that studio, because they had a walkthrough of like, oh, we've got this new studio, da da da, and they actually had, the cameras that were pointed at the people. They had cameras that were in this on the ceiling that were pointed down at the table. There was one focal point on the DM. There was one focal point on some other player. It was like they had all of this hardware.
Yeah.
And how has it been for you for your the other group that's all video and stuff? Has it actually gone well or?
Yeah, it's gone well. I have two cameras. I have one camera on myself, the DM, and then one camera on the table. And I set the table up exactly like I would if we were playing in person. Now, it's been okay, but now that we have a three-dimensional table sometimes, this brings other challenges. It was easy when I had a flat map and miniatures. But once you start having levels, like in a game we played a couple of weeks ago, I had mountains and a flying castle, and then down
Yeah.
in the valley, there was a village. So the challenge with that is you have to think about where the camera is going to move to later in the game if the characters are at these different levels. So I'm still learning how to do that better. And so your setup has to be really thought through. And the one part I did think about that worked out what that time was I had dungeon areas for the village that we were in last week or the week before. Anyway, I had dungeon levels and I had those on a separate table, and I knew I could move them onto the main table and use the camera right away into the dungeon. So it does become a little more strategic how you organize your table. And I think too much of that 3D terrain and too much of a setup is just not practical in most
No,
games.
true.
If you want to give the party the choice to do what they want, which is what I like. I pretty much like a sandbox campaign where you guys can choose to do whatever you want. If you like that style of game, the more you have set up, the more difficult it is going to be to do transitions to other scenes.
Yeah,
So
totally.
yeah, so that's the one downside to having a really intricate table setup. Um, So you really have to think about the scenes that are going to happen in your game and how much of a sandbox game do you have. Um, that's that's part of the part of what you have to plan as the DM.
Yeah, because I've seen so many different tables like on Reddit or on YouTube. You see all these really intricate tables where they have like a place for everyone to play around,
Hmm.
and then they have this sort of sunken area where there's a they put the pieces if they're using 3D objects and stuff. Um, but I definitely there was one that decided they started that way and then they decided not to do that because they thought it got in the way, and then they replaced the little sunken area with they tried like the putting basically laying a TV flat on the ground and then
Right.
having the DM control the map and stuff, and they thought that was a bit better, but eventually went back to just doing the tabletop stuff with a few little items here and there,
Hmm.
and because it became tedious, I guess, from what they were saying. That I'm reading into that a bit, but it became a lot of work, and
Yeah.
it
Well,
kind of took away the fun part of it. So
exactly. And I think that sometimes people overthink things in the gaming world and in, these are games that we have fun. And if it's getting too complicated and impractical, what's the point? It's supposed to be fun. So that's one reason I say with Kwood Publishing that we make practical and inspiring products, because there are a lot of good ideas that intellectually, theoretically might sound like a good idea for gaming, but in practical terms, it's not practical at all. Um, for example, and the most simplest example is for the dungeon master. You don't need more stuff. Like you usually are sitting at a small table, and sometimes like most people still have a DM screen, although I know some people don't do that. And you only have a certain amount of space. So you can have some books and you can have your dice and your notes. But the idea that you're going to be able to have like decks of cards everywhere and dice towers and a tracker for initiative, it gets totally impractical. For me, one of the simplest things I tell other DMs who ask me about running the game is for the initiative, just take post-its and put them on the back of the DM screen, and you just write down the scores, and so the players don't even have to see it. And there's no reason to have an elaborate, like I've seen these elaborate posts with names in, like you can add names, sort of like a signpost, right? And you can have names in order, and there's people who have these huge like notes hanging off their DM screen, and most of these things are impractical and they're getting in the way. In my experience. So yeah, there's a lot of that where people are overthinking it. Like even with fifth edition now, they're going to have a 5.5 or a sixth version in 2024, I believe. It
right.
sounds like they're going to make it backwards compatible to fifth edition. So you're going to be able to run all your 5e stuff. But it sounds like most of it is just overthinking fifth edition. Like things like saying, oh, we're going to take bonus actions away. It's not complicated. Like I know 5-year olds and 6-year olds and 7-year olds who play D&D who understand bonus action. And there's some of that in gaming where people, like I said, just overthink it. Like you have the smoothest, most efficient, for sure D&D system, maybe RPG system. Just leave it alone, you know?
That's like the well, it kind of just reminded me of what I was saying earlier about how I was looking for all the books and I wanted to get books and things, and uh, the other thing I was going through is I was trying to figure out how to track all of this stuff. That if I had all these books and I was utilizing, okay, this particular class, the third book I bought, has like some things in it for that, and there's some things over here, and there's
Mhm.
all this information, and trying to put that on a character sheet was kind of a pain, and so I went out. I found some software to try and sort of keep that up, and that software worked really well to sort of once you're building your character sheet, it actually reminded you, hey, by the way, if you have chosen this particular class with this particular aspect or whatever it was, here's the calculations that you actually need to make.
Yeah.
And that was helpful. But I did that for about, I don't know, 4 or 5 months, and then I was realizing after a while, I'm like, you know what? I can remember the stuff I just noted on the sheet if I'm just using a pencil, and I didn't really need to have a lot of the sort of detail, because all you really have to do for a bulk of it is you calculate it once, it's on your sheet, you can just read it off, and you're like, okay, I rolled that, that's what I add to it, okay, great. And I know whether I pass or fail, and so I kind of went backwards. I sort of decided, you know what, I
Mhm.
can't do. I started to overthink it. I started to really kind of delve into all these tools to help me out,
Mhm.
and I've seen people using like tablets and things like that to have character sheets on, which I think is okay, but I don't know. It kind of also limits what's going on, I guess. And um, but yeah, it simple, simple, simple. Keeping it simple is really kind of what I've found helped me in a huge way. Because then you
Yeah.
can actually enjoy what the hell you're doing. Like, I'm going to climb up that monster's face and I'm going to stab it in the eyeballs, and that kind of stuff can come out instead of looking at this thing going, oh god, okay, if I do that and I have to do that, and then I can throw fireballs at its head, and no, just
Yeah, I
stab it.
think that simplicity, you're just more present, you know.
Exactly.
You don't need to have all this extra technology or uh, like I think the some of the additional aids, like I think spell cards for a player, if you have room, I think that sometimes can be quite useful. But I think a lot of like at our table, we don't have any tech. Um, and I think it just helps people to stay more present and everybody's more connected to the group. And I find as soon as someone brings out a phone or brings out a tablet, that their attention is now gone somewhere else.
Yeah, and you have
And
the potential that suddenly a little notification goes off or something, and yeah,
yeah, and
that
even
that always
looking at a
bugs me.
screen, there's such a difference between looking at a screen and looking at a piece of paper. And again, it's such a simple game, really. Like unless you're playing a spellcaster, um, it's not complicated. Where you can use a pencil or a pen and a piece of paper and dice. And I understand, there's tons of different tables, and some people that works great. Um, in our experience, we like to, the simplest is the best for us overall. I think the only tech we have at the table usually is music, um,
Yeah,
a speaker for music, and then we do. Oh yeah, we've had characters who maybe have a theme song, or they're a bard and they have songs. That's worked out when we said, okay,
that that's enjoyable. Yeah, that
yeah.
that adds to the enjoyment level. It has no purpose other than trying to come up with a creative way to. I actually always think of it as um, the sort of the worldwide wrestling. The wrestling sort of intro where wrestler X walks into the ring and then this music plays. That's
Mhm.
exactly what I think every time. Like, okay, I am this character and this is my.
Yeah.
Yeah, that it
So I
just
like
adds to that fun.
Yeah, I think that's a cool idea. I think more for like a bard, if you have a song that's like, your sort of, your calling card. Um, I think some of that use is that can be worked well, but yeah, I think usually for our experience and my experience back when I used to play is the simpler the better. Um, and we didn't have much in the beginning. I mean, if you weren't in a really big city, it was hard to get the books and even, our DM screen, and then and dice. There wasn't much. There weren't 10,000 dice companies back then like there are now. And
Well, yeah,
miniatures,
I had the red dice that you had to use was it wax? I think it was wax, and you had to like
the crayon, the worst crayon ever created by humans, that would disintegrate as
just
you tried to put the
crumbled.
like that's how cheap, right? That's how cheap the game was, right? You have to fill in the numbers on the dice yourself. Um, and it was, yeah, a crayon that as you colored in those numbers on the dice, the crayon just crumbled to pieces. Yeah, and finding miniatures, there wasn't much choice. I think maybe I had 2 dozen back then. Um, and there were definitely no maps for the table that I remember. there's no 3D terrain other than people, grabbing stuff from train sets and miniature warfare sets.
That's true. I actually played. It must have been, I would say, the late '80s, where somebody actually had done that. They basically kit bashed a bunch of stuff that you would normally put in like miniature areas for different scales of trains and stuff. I kind of like that. I liked that aesthetic over some other more commercially sort of stuff that was they were trying to sell for the game. I mean, again, there wasn't a heck of a lot, but
Hmm.
people were trying. But it always comes back to just it's a game, man.
Yeah.
I remember playing with a group back then, and I think it was late high school, and provincial exams, which we used to have them in this province many years ago. You had to study like a crazy person, so off I went to do that, and I couldn't make some of the games. And
Hmm.
I got a phone call from the guy running the game. He's like, "You're out! I tore your sheet in half and then burned it on the table." And I'm like, "Wow, okay, well, I guess you're not damaged in any way." But it
That's
was really
intense.
weird.
Do you remember what your first adventure was?
Well, the very first one was in the red box.
Hmm.
I remember that. After that, a lot of the adventures that we did uh, was sort of in that sort of against the giants kind of world.
Hmm.
Stuff around then, sort of that. I guess I always thought of that as sort of the main campaign. Tomb of Horrors, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Um, but later on, it was when we started getting into the sort of homebrew stuff. And I remember doing a homebrew where I did a D&D set of what would it be if D&D was more like Beyond the Looking Glass, like Alice in Wonderland.
Right.
And that was kind of fun. Um, but again, you discover girls, and then people don't want to play as much, and then you kind of, I think that's sort of a very common thing. You play a
Yeah.
lot as a kid, then you kind of drift off, and then
Oh yeah.
later years later you come back to it. So
Oh yeah. Like yeah, sports and girls D&D was over. Once my sports became, we were practicing, you know, out like every morning and after school. There was a point in once I got to high school, it was pretty much like that. Once that happened, and then yeah, there was just it was no time, and I left the game. And I think like yourself, I didn't play for years. I never thought I'd play again. I forgot about the game. It was
oh,
only
so did
because of
I.
Skyrim, and then a great book called Of Dice and Men by David Ewalt about the history of D&D. Those two things
Yeah.
got me, woke me up to the realization, this is a game you loved. You can go back and play that game. Um, but originally, I'm pretty sure my first adventure was Keep on the Borderlands,
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
which is
I would group that into the against the giants sort of era. I used to
yeah, it
have
was
that
that era.
module.
Like for sure, we did Keep on the Borderlands. Then we did the A1 to 4 series, the Slave Lords.
Yep.
All these were based around in Greyhawk, the world of Greyhawk. And then I think after that, I think the first adventure that maybe I played, I think I might have played an Against the Giants to start. And that's around the time I left that group and decided I want to DM myself.
Right.
And then I think for myself, I bought the basic and expert set. And then almost right away, AD&D came out, and Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. And then I think I might have started DMing the G1 to 3 again. And then I got heavily into Greyhawk, and I was into Greyhawk for years, with the Barrier Peaks and
Oh yeah.
the D1 to 3. My favorite series is D1 to 3, the Underdark Drow series. That just blew my mind because it's a whole other. You've got a whole other world, a whole other society. Once you get the party underground, there's a whole different feeling. Um, and you pretty much have to be a higher level to be able to, to deal with that sort of adventure. And yeah, and at the time, I mean, most of the people I played with when I was DMing were other athletes, other water polo players, and I remember going to high school and finding out, oh, there's a D&D club, and I walked into the club and I walked out
Ugh.
because um, it just wasn't. It wasn't it just wasn't my idea of the game, and also I didn't like the idea of like playing all these. Like I think in that room there were 3 or 4 tables, 3 or 4 groups, and I was like, I don't want to listen to another group playing right next to me. Um, it's going to interfere in the game, and which is probably why I haven't been into any conventions yet. Um, I think I
That would
totally
be
see.
intense. Like that
Yeah,
overload of you're trying to figure out what you just rolled, and then suddenly there's 20 other people around you doing the same thing, which would drive me crazy.
yeah. Well, I see as a player how it wouldn't be too bad. I think it could be pretty fun being a player, but as a dungeon master myself, I don't think I would. I don't think I would enjoy that when, yeah, there's so much distraction and so much noise.
Um, it would drive me nuts. I remember the one of my favorite modules was I don't know which. It was the one with the crashed spacecraft.
That's Barrier
Um,
Peaks.
is that Barrier Peaks? Okay,
Yeah, it's called
yeah,
like
that
the
was one of my favorites.
expedition to. I think the expedition to Barrier Peaks. Yeah, that was a really unusual one because that was. I think that's the only AD&D adventure that has any sci-fi content.
Yeah,
Spoiler
because you
alert.
had laser guns, you had or plasma or whatever the heck they were.
Yeah,
Um, that one actually, that was the one
robots.
where I really enjoyed the fact that it came with little printouts of like what you're looking at in particular rooms
Right.
and stuff like that. That was really cool. I
Yeah,
enjoy that stuff. I like.
there's not too many adventures that did that. Tomb of Horrors did that too. The book came with a bunch of handouts that you could show the players that, this is what you're seeing right now, or messages or ruins that they had to try to decipher.
Right.
That was a really good idea. Actually, that's something I should remember if we start doing more adventures. Um,
I would fully support that because I did a the last game that I ran was back in 2012, I think, and I started doing that as the game was progressing. I started doing those little bits where I'd have, oh, you find a note, oh, and guess what? This is what it is. This is what it looks
mhm,
like, and that kind of stuff. I went to the like Staples or some office supply store and I found like paper that looked like crumpled paper and stuff like that, and printed off the messages,
mhm.
and then but yeah, that little touches like that are not a TV in your table where you're moving a map around. Like that to me is the best way to do it.
Yeah,
That makes it fun.
yeah.
But we've been talking for almost an hour, so perhaps we should wrap this up, boys and girls, and go to Kickstarter. Look for Kwood Publishing and back some stuff because I have been for I think this is the second one I backed. I think it was actually it was the you actually were the one who introduced me to actually doing stuff on Kickstarter because
Oh,
I
really?
knew of Kickstarter. I had an account, but I had never backed anything.
Oh,
And I'm like,
wow.
oh, this is actually really easy. I'm just to do this, and there we go.
Yeah, yeah.
But
No, it's a great platform. Has totally changed role-playing games. And yeah, I think you backed 2 or 3 of our Kickstarters.
yeah,
Yeah, I think
it's been
we'll be back again to chat more about the game.
yeah.
And there's lots of. It was interesting, when I started doing this, I assumed once in a while I might get questions about the game. I've played the game for a long time. I've been a storyteller for a long time. But the interesting thing is that most questions I have about the game are actually about how to run a group,
Yeah.
and so that's something we can talk about more. There's lots of things to that you can try in terms of running a group that's successful. I think we've all been in groups that don't work,
Ah,
and
been there.
yeah, yeah, in different ways, right? And so that's something we could talk about and talk about many different parts of this game.
Especially with how to deal with really involved players who like to really polish their swords while playing.
That was a classic. Yes. What do you do with your turn? I polish my sword. Next turn, what are you doing this turn? I'm going to change my clothes. And everybody at the table looked at this player. Are you sure you know what this game, what we're doing here? Are you sure? Of course, then there are players who, when they play small characters, like to try to climb onto these creatures and bite them.
Yeah, I don't know who does that ever. Never. I've never seen that at all. I just wish I could get right up close, you know?
I have
But
to
we'll
make
talk
a
about that
class.
again.
I have to make a class for you,
Oh, excellent.
specifically for you. Yeah,
The climber class.
yeah. The climber and biting class. Yeah. Includes the spell Vicious Mockery, for sure.
As a I think it's a cantrip, isn't it? Yeah, that would work.
Yeah.
Now I just want to play.
Yeah.
All right, until next time, thank you for watching, listening, doing whatever you're doing. We'll be back again. Talk soon.
Later.